If you look at the number of women losing their lives and number of newborns dying in the process, it was a remarkable improvement. Encouraged by these remarkable results, there is now a bigger trial in Uttar Pradesh at the moment going on with a very large scale of population sample size. Not only that, it has attracted also attention of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They put in $14 million to better understand how a childbirth checklist can improve the mortality rate. UP has a very large population, very significant birth rate. Its population is more than several countries around the world. And the pilot is expected to cover more than 100,000 birds. So without any doubt, it will produce a great statistical power and be evidence-based to sell it to the rest of the world. So this is an interesting development that is currently going on. And everyone involved in the project in the patient safety area is terribly excited that if this checklist works well, we have won the battle for maternal mortality. The next, I'm going to share a couple of slides on how checklists are developed. It's a fairly collaborative process. There is a global consultation. The global institutions are involved. There is an evidence search through the literature. There is a statistical validity. It is piloted. The data is cleaned. And there is a strong science which drives the whole process because it is to be sold to clinicians and the scientific world globally. This is an example of who are the collaborators in checklist development. Just a word on emergency room trauma checklist. This is a newest one. Why should we have a trauma checklist for injured patient? Because injuries kill more than HIV, TB, and malaria combined kill. It is the biggest killer in young population. And medical errors are quite common in resuscitation of severely injured when they approach the emergency room. The first draft was developed way back in 2009 in Rio de Janeiro. This is what the trauma ER checklist look like. As the patient arrives, before the patient emergency room, and finally after the investigation, there are several critical steps, A, B, C, at every stage that are being examined and looked at. This particular checklist was piloted at a number of sites around the world, and there are a couple of hospitals in India as well. And it encompasses globally, including high-income countries such as Canada and Australia, and also some low and middle-income countries, including countries in Africa like Cameroon and Rwanda. So it was ensured that it is applicable globally for wide consumption for the clinicians and the healthcare staff involved in care of the injured in emergency room at the front of the hospital. The results are extremely encouraging. More than 10,000 patients were enrolled in the study. Countries, as I told you, range from low to high income countries. The evidence is being currently validated and checklist is to be finalized in 2012, and hopefully we would be able to use it in early 2013. Interestingly, it shows that there is a significant change in the outcome when the results are used. It says that severely injured patients were up to 25% likely to die, less likely to die after controlling for patient age, gender, and injury severity score. So that means that we are in a position to save about 25% of the patients who are severely injured, otherwise would have possibly died. The other interesting finding is that several processes have significantly improved. So if you introduce a checklist, it is likely that some of the processes which are very important, for example, cervical spine examination, tetanus vaccination, airway, breathing, circulatory intervention, they are likely to move very significantly high and see a remarkable jump. Before I conclude, just a final word on the checklist. Of course, checklists are not the final step towards optimizing surgical quality. We all know that. We have a long way to travel. Having said that, in the meantime, the checklists have crossed the threshold from just a good idea and have become standard of care worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manjul. Tell people memory is short-lived, so better prepare checklist for everything so that you don't go wrong. Especially when it comes to patient care, we have to be absolutely sure what we are doing for our patient. And to simplify in the setup of operation theatre, as Dr. Manjul has said, that divide into 3 groups before induction of anesthesia, though he has covered holistically all the departments of patient care. And second group is before the skin incision is made, and third, before the patient leaves operating room. Now, who all are there to decide as a nurse, surgeon, anesthetist, technician? So it is basically a teamwork. They should know their role and they should communicate effectively so that ultimate result is we can bring down the morbidity and mortality. And to effect this checklist, WHO has launched this 19-item checklist in June 2008, which was again published in September 2009, which our speaker has covered so beautifully, giving the holistic viewpoint of how we can reduce the mortality and morbidity and give a better care to our patient. Thank you very much for such a nice and lucid presentation. And in a traditional Apollo way, please give him a big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you by getting photographs clicked, innovations and material.
Start. This is something that we all talk about. Healthcare should be safe, it should be timely, it should be effective, it should be efficient, it should be equitable, and above all, it should be patient-centric. These are some of the newspaper clippings, as you see them. We have seen the number of deaths that happened in India in the last year or so. This is in our neighboring country, which happened early this year. This is when we spend on an average of 10,000 rupees a night in a healthcare facility. We are still safe. So let me run you through 2 real-life experiences, which my friend had. He's a gynecologist and practices in Goregaon area in Bombay. So almost well past midnight, he moved into an OT for a delivery case. So he noticed a scar here, and that time he started sweating. So he rushed out and talked to the parents of the patient and said, "Iska kabhi operation hua tha?" And you know the response he got? "Arey sir, wo to bahut pehle hua tha, usse aapko kya matlab?" Imagine a patient telling him this when it's a fact that a patient who has gone a cardiac intervention cannot be given the same anesthesia. And then he told them, "It is only Allah that can save your daughter now." Luckily, the patient survived. There's another case that happened. A patient is in the OT, prepared, he gets in, starts, finds a catheter in the abdomen. So again, this time he goes out, talks to the relatives, and they say, "Yes, कुछ साल पहले जब पैदा हुआ था बच्चे थी, तो उसके ब्रेन में कैविटी था, तो the brain cavity is shunted to abdominal cavity. And these things are not disclosed to the doctor. So in fact, patients are equally responsible for their safety. You cannot just blame the practitioners. So the patients are at risk. It's a known fact about the number of times, we are more susceptible to patient in the infections in the hospitals or healthcare facilities. I won't repeat these data, but the interesting point is 80% of all errors are preventable. Now, what are the challenges to patient safety? So if you say United States, which is the benchmark for everything we do in healthcare, 300 plus studies show that health-related material far exceeds the average rating skills of US adults. If so is the case in the United States, what about India, where more than 50% people are illiterate? Communication or lack of it is the root cause of 70% of the sentinel events reported by Joint Commission resources. The most distressing part of healthcare is there is a criminalization of errors in medical science. And that has led to most of the senior doctors sitting in this room, if you ask them, would your children become doctors? The answer would be probably no. It's not a profession that was coveted 3 decades back. People have started moving away from it. And you find a lot of hot doctors getting into administration and other jobs, of course, well paid and less stressed than being a medical doctor. So criminalization is not doing good to patient safety. This is again a real life example. This again happened in Bombay, where a nurse in an emergency ward gave a similar looking medicine of the similar color to the patient, and the patient died. Of course, it was reported as a medicine reaction, and nothing legal happened. But you know, this doctor called up my friend, who is a doctor and a lawyer, and asked him, I know this has happened. We have ensured that nothing goes, against us or our doctor who did it or a nurse who did it. But is there a platform where I can report this thing? He said, why do you want to do that? He said, I want to do that anonymously because it can happen that this will get repeated because the medicine is same, is used regularly, and a very likelihood of more people dying because of a last moment, reaction and giving this medicine. He said, no, in India we don't have such a facility. So yes, we know there's a challenge. We know there has to be something that has to be done. So the patient payer groups, I don't think we have any patient groups in India. Patient Care Collaborative Alliance in the United States. A self-declaration by patients in local language to the doctor. Now the doctor where these cases happen, he has ensured that when a patient walked into his hospital, they signed a declaration in the local language, detailing the history and other side effects and other things that they know of. Anonymous reporting of errors on the website, like we have the National Coordinating Council for Medication Error Reporting and Prevention, it's in the United States. I think we need this in India. Articles in newspapers and radio talk awareness. Training of healthcare volunteers, professionals, nurses, pharmacists, and doctors on patient safety and how to prevent errors. Might be worth setting a patient safety desk in all major healthcare facilities. A desk that removes the fear from the minds of the people entering the healthcare facility and gives them the comfort to ask any stupid question they have. See, this is a fact that doctor's place will always be next to God, no matter how friendly he is. So you shouldn't expect a patient to be free and frank to him. And this can be only addressed if you have someone which is non-doctor manning the desk. Patient charter. This is something that we mooted, and this is something what Sangeeta called me to come and talk about. I'll have to see how this works as a link. Can you switch on the link, please? So this is the patient charter that talks on one side the patient rights, but also talks about the patient responsibilities. Because you cannot blame a doctor if you are not responsible patient. So if you can scroll down, see this is available on the DMAI website. In fact, Sangeeta has asked Anupam to print it and post it in prominent places here in this conference. You can have a look at it. This is in the public domain for a few weeks before NABH, and we sit together to finalize this patient charter. And we hope to put this in every practitioner's facility in 3 languages, national, regional, and English. We are hoping that this will give patient a form of awareness to ask questions, to report things, and being in QCI, we are hoping that we'll have a mechanism to address complaints if any. Go back to the presentation. So now comes my last slide, which is the message: profession safety is in patient safety. It's a very simple line that I coined for this conference. I have seen umpteen incidents where hospitals are vandalized, doctors are beaten, paramedical staffs are mishandled. You can only prevent this if you focus on patient safety. There is no way out. Thank you so much.
Basically focuses on nursing best practices and what are the different things that we could do to improve patient safety. That session will be held here from now, which includes a panel discussion as well. There are 2 more tracks which are happening in hall number MRG.03, which is on the same floor, so hall number 03 and 04. There are about 24 paper presentations, so I guess around on an average of 12 in each. So as per your interest, the topics are given in the agenda copy. So as per your interest, you can, go for the sessions which interest you more. Post this session, we will be breaking for today. Tomorrow again, we will start exactly at 8:15. We understand that tomorrow is a Sunday, but we would like to request you that please come on time tomorrow morning, because we really have a lot of practical things which will be shared by the respective speakers. Because what we are trying to focus on is that, we share with you the best practices, what we have implemented in different organizations or our organizations, so that you could take it back and implement them back in your organizations. Even the main aim or objective of the paper presentations as well is the same. So now we break, and there are 3 multiple sessions. Depending on your interest, you can attend any one of these sessions or juggle between multiple sessions. Tomorrow we'll start at 8:15 in the morning. As we have told you that we have got some lucky draws, which we would be, taking the details towards the end of the sessions tomorrow, and we would be giving those lucky draws. One of them is an iPod, one is a BlackBerry phone, and some discounted gift vouchers. So thank you so much for today. We'll have the nursing focus session in this hall, the 2 paper presentation sessions in hall 3 and hall 4 on the same floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to all of you, this elite gathering, to this expert session in nursing being conducted here and now. If some of you want to come forward and use the forward round tables, it will be a nice gathering. That's a suggestion from all of us. Otherwise, if you are comfortable, you can continue in the same places. Patient safety has many dimensions. To name a few: medication safety, information safety, communication safety, diagnostic safety, treatment safety, and environmental safety. We summarize patient safety as sustained proactive process of identifying, avoiding, and rapidly resolving errors, omissions, mishaps, and miscommunications that could affect a patient's healing process, health, or well-being at any point, at any time, in any healthcare setting. In every aspect of this patient safety, nurse has a very, very immensely important role to play. In this expert session today, we have amongst us 2 eminent nursing experts to give their valuable views and thoughts on the same area of nursing practice, which is called patient safety. Let me first invite our first speaker and expert, Ms. Thankam Gomez. Ms. Thankam Gomez has a wide range of experience of over 30 years in corporate hospitals of India and abroad. She is presently serving Berkeley Health Education Private Limited at New Delhi in the capacity of Executive Vice President. It is an India-USA collaboration venture and deals with providing hands-on training through the simulation lab work for developing nursing competencies. Earlier, she has directed the nursing services as Chief of Nursing in Fortis Healthcare Group at India and majorly contributed in standardizing nursing processes with keen focus on improving nursing quality and ensuring patient safety. So let's put our hands together for welcoming Ms. Thankam Gomez. The second expert that we have today is Ms. Falakshi Manjirekar. Ms. Falakshi Manjirekar is currently holding the portfolio of Director Nursing at PD Hinduja Hospital and Medical Research Center, Mumbai. A postgraduate from the prestigious SNDT University, she directs the nursing services and continuing education program for nurses. She also holds the position of Executive Director at Nightingale Initiative for Global Health, an international organization, Ottawa, Canada. She has contributed to the field of nursing education and represents Examination Board of Maharashtra Nursing Council. She has earlier held the position of Chief of Nursing of Lilavati Hospital and MRC and Saifi Hospital, Mumbai. She is also an active member of Trained Nurses Association of India from her state, that is Maharashtra. So let's welcome Ms. Falakshi Manjirekar, another nursing expert, to this forum with a good round of applause, please. A quick review on how we will conduct this session. Both our speakers will be given about 15 minutes time each to discuss their thoughts and presentations. At the end of the session, we will leave the forum open for some of the questions that are there from the audience for about 10 minutes. So audience is requested to keep their questions ready during the sessions are in progress. So here, we begin our first session. Nurses, do they have a role in equipment safety? How can they contribute? I invite Ms. Thankam Gomez, Executive Vice President, Berkeley Health Education Private Limited, to take us through the session.
Hello? Am I on? Good afternoon, Hyderabad. Good afternoon, Hyderabad. Okay, I'm a person who talks to audiences who are responding to me. That's why I wanted to hear that you're all awake and not sleeping. And I'm so happy to be here. First of all, let me thank Apollo Group for inviting me, especially Usha, my dear friend, for remembering me. And I could always trust her to give me a topic that is usually not discussed. So she said, Thankam, I don't want you to talk about the usual stuff. Let's see. And she said, equipment safety. And I must say that this is a topic that is very seldom discussed among nurses, and we usually do not pay much attention to the equipments because we think that is biomedical's work or engineering's work or somebody else's work. But we do work with them very, very closely. So greetings from Delhi. Equipment safety. When you think of a nurse, can you imagine equipments around the nurse? Can you? Yes. 1, 2, 3, or many? Many. So whether you are an OPD nurse, whether you are an OT nurse, you are a critical care nurse, whether you are working in primary health care or secondary, tertiary, any care center where you work, the nurses are always with equipments. Then is it important that we should know something about the equipment safety? Yes? That's very nice. You are very responding audience. I really love it. Now, I'm going to share a few things, thanks to Mr. Gupta, who was speaking just before me. He set the scene, and Subhasha definitely gave a good introduction to the safety, so I don't have to go all over the place for safety. I am going to share with you real-life experiences. I am not here to give you gyan on equipment safety. I'm going to share a few stories and weave the safety angle to the stories that I'm going to share with. I'm very sure that all of you must have read this in the newspaper. where, sorry, 40 hospitals were found violating fire safety norms and in an audit conducted in Mumbai. And out of all the hospitals, 75% of the hospitals were private. Now think about it, how many of us nurses know everything about fire safety in our hospital? Do I know when I work in a particular area, what is my fire safety in that particular area? Do I know what to do in case there is something happens? Or when I am called for a fire drill, do I run away? I say I'm busy, I can't, I'm not interested, I'll stand at the back and watch what is happening. So we are not prepared for the safety. I am not going to tell you what you have to do. These are only thoughts provoking you to think about what you need to do. And it's also provoking thoughts in my mind what I need to do today, tomorrow, and times to come to make sure the patient safety is getting better and better day by day. The Institute of Medicine, I'm sure from morning you must have heard these figures where they say in a country like US where the medical errors are captured, it's about 98,000 people die any given year, and that number is more than the patients who really die of cancer or AIDS or any other stuff. And more people die annually because of medication errors than from workplace injuries. So these are data which are staring on our face and telling that we are working in an industry where so many errors are being committed, and are we seriously thinking about these safety anchors? Am I talking to myself? I am educating myself. Am I being aware every moment of time that anything and everything that I do with my patient, that it is going to impact that life, that it can do something good for him or it can really harm the patient? I need to think about that very, very seriously. This is a data that I could get from the net, from the Journal of Anesthesiology, where they did a study in anesthesia department, and they found that equipment failure, 69, which contributed to 11% of the total errors that they could see. So if we think that equipment is something that we really need not worry about it, then we are sadly mistaken. We really need to very seriously think about all the equipments that we are going to handle, whether it is a simple stethoscope or it is a BP apparatus, to the high-tech heart-lung machine, or it is an intra-aortic balloon pump machine. We really have to stop and think, do I know this machine well to use this safely on my patient? Times of India, this again I got it from the net, where it is written, medicine heals, but this fact does not hold true for every 300th patient. As per World Health Organization, it is believed that 1 in 10 hospital admission leads to an adverse event. I think I saw that in one of the presentations. But it also states that 1 in 300 admissions will die because there was a mistake. Now, how many of us would like to risk that number? How many of us will like to be that 1 in 300 to go to hospital and die where I'm not supposed to die? Anybody? Obviously not. Then why should we think about that for a patient who comes to us to get better? Just think about it. This is a long story. I'm going to cut it short. This is talking about a patient, 47-year-old, who had gone for a simple meniscectomy to the operation theater, and he ended up, let me see whether this works, sorry. I just wanted to show. Should I do here? No. Okay, just look at the underlined line. The last one, let's read the last one first. This turned out to be a severe hypoxic brain injury resulting in permanent disability, a necessity for lifelong care, and an inability to return to his career. Person who went to the hospital to get a simple repair of his meniscus ended up a vegetable. Why did that happen? That everything is written in between. While they found that his saturation was falling, anesthetist was trying to figure out what's happening. He increased the oxygen, nothing happens, the saturation is falling, heart rate is falling down. Then finally they found there was a leak in the circuit which was supplying him oxygen. So obviously the patient was deprived of oxygen and he ended up a vegetable. This was a very, very unintended outcome of a simple surgery, and that happened because of a failure in an. Hence, it took 2 long months, it's not two, it took 2 long months for a Delhi hospital to throw in the towel. That means for the hospital to say we had done enough, because in 2 days, the executive from CII lost his life on the operation table because somebody put the wrong tube for the oxygen. This happened right in India. Equipment failure in a Chicago hospital, they did a study and they found what are the common equipment related problems that leads to patient harm. Intravenous pumps, do we use them? Yes? Every day? Every time. X-ray equipment, do we know them? Yes? As nurses we may not use, but it is still being used. Defibrillators, yes? Cancer diagnostic equipment, maybe nurses, they don't use them, but it leads to patient harm. Anesthesia machines, and look at that. Blood pressure equipment, will you believe that this can lead to patient harm? And it is proven in a study that it is one of the reasons for equipment failure which leads to patient harm. Now, henceforth, whatever that I am stating here, they are my own experiences that I have had in my life as a nurse of critical care. I was in critical care for 16 years. After that, I had been an administrator for more than 11 years, and in all this time, I have come across these incidents. I'm just citing them here for us to know that this can happen, and it is very important for us to be very, very diligent when we are practicing around equipments. 30-year-old male Filipino patient transferred to step down after being in ICU for 3 months with insulin infusion. Next day, the patient is back in ICU, unconscious due to hypoglycemic brain damage. Why? The nurse, by mistake, instead of putting 5 ml per hour of insulin, she or he had put 50 ml per hour. It's a human error related to equipment. Strange but true, Hill-Rom bed broken down with the patient on it. Hill-Rom bed, very sturdy, just broken down. When we tried to find out how can a Hill-Rom break down, answer was the bed was not getting locked. We did inform the engineering 1 week ago. Very standard answer that we get every day. I told somebody, nothing happened. But what is our responsibility when somebody is not responding to our query, our assistance to come and help my patient? What am I supposed to do? I used to tell my nurses, get the roof down. You have to make everybody else's life miserable for your patient. That's why we are nurses. That's why we are called as patient advocates. Do it. Fail to notice patient going into ventricular fibrillation because they got so used to the alarm in the ICU, because nurses are every day working in ICU, they're used to the alarms. The alarm has got different tones. It tells you that this is the alarm that's happening, but they got so used to it, so they were not paying attention. Till the doctor walked in and right in front of him, he could see the straight line, but then it was too late. We couldn't save the patient. So who is at fault? I don't need answers, just think about it. Patient's BP dropped as the inotropic drip was not opened after loading the new syringe. I have seen this not once, many times. Patient saturation dropped as the patient was receiving 2 liters of oxygen via mask. Now, think about it. Why the patient desaturated when the oxygen was being given 2 liters? Now, I will park it with you, and when we finish, because my time is running out, anybody can come and tell me the answer. Patient was on oxygen, receiving oxygen, but still the patient desaturated. Why did that happen? Augmentation pressure on a patient in IABP dropped when heart rate changed. Now, why did that happen? This is all because the nurses were not aware of the technical reasons for this that can happen. And many of us do procedures without thinking, why are we doing this? The rationale behind doing something the way it is being dictated to be done. That is why there are protocols. For every step in a protocol, there is a reason behind it. We have to educate ourselves with the reason. Only when the nurses become thinking fast and making decisions for the sake of patient safety, the real sense of patient safety will arrive, because the doctors are there only hardly about an hour in 24 hours. The rest 23 hours, the patients are with us, nurses. So whether the nurse at the bedside can practice safe care is a big question for the patient's safety. Otherwise, the patient can be 1 in 300 as we saw before. A new BP apparatus was brought into unit and found to be giving a reading less than 20 mm from the old instrument. What will you do if you are in that place? Will you even notice it? As a staff nurse, will you do something about it? If you are a ward in charge, will you do something about it? As a head of the department, what are you going to do? Do we have enough knowledge on electrical safety when it comes to equipments? Staff nurse gets electric shock and sustains minor burns. Patient complains of mild shocks via pulse oximeter probe. I'm sure many of you might have heard about it. If not, I have seen it. Both instances, frayed wire was found, and the nurses did not pay attention that they are working with equipment which has frayed wires, which can lead to such accidents. Have you seen infusion pumps with IV fluids dripping all over them? Yes? I'm sure. It's a very common sight in ICU's Christmas tree, with too many infusions going on and all the dextrose and salines falling on the pumps, and then you complain the pump is not working, there are shocks, and it's not, the equipment gets repaired very often. Do we have adequate knowledge? Sorry. Now, equipment management plan, it's a longish, it's a text. This is GAN. So I'm not going to read the entire bit, but I'm going to just touch on few things. Selection and acquisition of medical equipment. We as nurse leaders, we have to persist to get involved in this so that we are aware of what is coming to be with the patient. Those equipments in which nurses have a role, not all the other equipments. Taking care of inventories, knowing the physical risk, evaluating the new types of equipment. It is important for nurse leaders. Knowing that there is maintaining, inspecting and testing periodicity for all medical equipments. Most important, do we know what is preventive maintenance for all the equipments that we have in our departments? Do we know what is calibration for those equipments? Do we know what is the importance of doing these stuff so that the care given to the patient is accurate and safe? We need to find answers to all this. Clinical engineering is a big word in today's healthcare industry. Monitoring, reporting incidents with a medical device is suspected in or attributed to the death or serious injury. When it comes to incident reporting, I used to tell my nurses that you should report everything and anything. But equipment related things they will not report. If I ask, why are you not reporting? I told the biomedical department. That is not good enough. It needs to be reported through quality as well. So if that also can go through a root cause analysis and see whether that is harming the patient. So now for us to think, can we afford not to know the equipment we use and work with them without knowing how best to use the equipment to ensure patient and staff safety? What's your answer, guys? Can we afford not to have the knowledge? We should have the knowledge? Okay. I think I was twisting the question. So in summary, I am just saying participate in selecting the right equipment, learn and get trained in safe use, maintenance and troubleshooting, learn electrical safety. Power cords can be very dangerous. These should be inspected for exposed wire or damaged plugs. Power cords should always be unplugged by pulling on the plug, not on the cord. Very common sights that I see in the hospital. Alarms on medical equipment are there for a reason. They should never be silenced or adjusted without thought. This is a very, very important thing, especially in critical care and in OT, that alarms should be never silenced without knowing what is causing the alarm. Report any faulty wire equipment and isolate it for repair. Protect all electrical equipments from fluid. Ensure that all equipments are repaired on time, their preventive maintenance done at their due intervals. Remember that equipments are as smart as we use them. Do you agree? Can they think? Can the equipments think? No. Can we think? Oh, good. So always use your critical thinking skills to ensure that the equipments do their job correctly to ensure safe care. This is my advice and the big thing to share with you, like in morning when Ms. Sangeeta Reddy asked, what will you tell one thing? So one thing that I will say is use your critical thinking skills. Nurses must maintain a high level of vigilance and clinical judgment to detect early changes in patient status that signal the need for intervention. Now, just a quick intro into why did I shift from healthcare to an education setup. The reason was only patient safety, because I realized that nurses play the most critical role in ensuring patient safety, and there was a need to educate our nurses the right way so that they are ready to look after a patient safely. Unfortunately, when nurses come out of schools and colleges, they are not readily skilled with all this kind of practical knowledge that they need. And I hope through this new role, I will be able to play a little small role to change the patient safety for good to come. Now, my question is, what is your decision? Would you like to be the orange balloon or would you like to be the blue balloon? Which one? Orange. Which one would you like to be, orange or blue? Then I am closing. Which balloon? I would always like to be the one special nurse. It's written there, the world's best nurse. Would you like to be one? The question is to the nurses. I am not asking to any other professionals. Nurses, would you like to be the world's best nurse? Good. So you like to be the orange balloon. Yes? So I am wishing you a safe and thoughtful caring of your patients. And thank you for your patience time. And thank you for the very attentive audience and responsive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gomez, for your enlightened thoughts. And I'm sure everyone enjoyed your talk. I now invite Ms. Falakshi Manzarekar, who will talk about her views and thoughts on patient safety issues in taking care of patients who are critically ill, how we as nurses can perform better. Ms. Falakshi Manzarekar, please.
Big hello to everybody here. I would like to congratulate the Apollo group to taking this initiative at a national level. A special appreciation, especially to Mrs. Usha Banerjee, who took this as a special forum, for nurses, because somehow we feel when we talk about patient safety, nurses have a major role. And here we are to talk a little bit about how can do in various forums, not all, but in some. I'll be speaking about the critical care units. Can we get better? Yes, we can get better. How better can we get? That's a question which sort of has an indefinite amount of answers. Will we have a solution? Maybe yes, maybe no. And when we talk about, a safety issue in an intensive care unit or an ICU, it is something which sort of, comes back to us when we as a healthcare provider are ready to give something to the patient. What I'm trying to do over here is instead of, talking into depths about various theoretical aspects on this issue, I'll be picking up a few studies which we have been able to, use as a reference, some of them which we have been doing in my hospital or my, surrounding my next door neighboring hospitals, and pick up a few lessons which we have learned from them. I've tried to divide them into about 5 areas. A staff-patient ratio, yes, a huge thing which we are still sort of, pondering, and we can never have enough discussion on that. A clinical pharmacy issue, a patient safety and staff overload issue, a teamwork activity, and a continuous standard of patient care. To start with, a staff-patient ratio, we used a classification which was called as a Raphael classification, where we don't focus into quantity, how many nurses, how many patients. No, we try and classify the patients, which is a patient who need, more nurses, which is a patient who need less nurses. And depending on that, we were able to correlate that directly to the mortality rate. And yes, it is not something, you don't really need rocket science to basically conclude you get a better patient ratio, you would get a lower mortality rate. But yes, we have studies which sort of, told us that. We were able to see that in the hospital setting as well as in the intensive care setting, and the mortality rates basically came down to as low as 0.7 and 0.6. A patient safety and a pharmacy team. This was a innovative thing which was tried up, and we found that was very helpful, because somewhere down the line, where intensive care units are concerned, the medication error rates are very high. And how can we help? We can basically help by apt decision taking. And this was something which was tried out, and we found that yes, we were able to bring down the ADEs remarkably, extremely high. We have rates here where we show that it decreased by around 66% from 10.4 per 1,000 patient days before the intervention to 3.5 after the intervention. What does this basically mean? This basically means a pharmacist and a non-pharmacist. Non-pharmacist is all of us, the nurses, the doctors, etc. A pharmacist was able to pick up clinical decisions which would relevantly help an individual to pick up prescription errors, and that went a long way. We also spoke about, staff overload. When we speak about staff overload, patient safety is definitely in. But besides patient safety, what else also is able to pick up where staff overload is concerned? Again, this is not something which we would need a long amount of studies to tell us. But yes, patient safety and adequate amount of load over the staff are definitely connected. We basically spoke over a 24-hour ratio and found that yes, adequate amount of load per nurse is definitely helpful. We also tried a strategy for various infection control measures and found out, yes, can we bring about adequate amount of teamwork and decrease the number of infections? Because somehow infections and ICUs, you can never speak about patient safety and not talk about infections. We speak about areas where we get patients who come in the intensive care unit for category A or disorder A or a surgery A, and when he's practically in midst of his intensive care unit period, he's already picked up a few infections which sort of, become an activity level B, and you need a large amount of teamwork to sort that out. And when we spoke about teamwork, we spoke about, patient-led multidisciplinary round, a daily flow meeting to access bail availability, a group of bundles, like basically the evidences, which could help us with the best practices, and also some amount of cultural change which involved decision making. These were the 4 areas which we brought together as a team activity, and what did we find? We found the VAP rate decreased, we found the BSI decreased, we found a downward trend in the urinary tract infection, and basically even the adverse events in the intensive care unit decreased. The main focus over here was a team decision making where everyone came together to contribute towards decisions. This again is a $1 million question. What are we talking about when we speak about continuous standard care? There are various focuses where continuous standard care can be discussed. We just picked up one focus, and that is our care standardized 24 hours a day and 7 days a week? We picked up weekdays and weekends. Somewhere we found that on weekends, yes, our decision making faltered, our ability to sort of, initiate what we could do on weekdays came down, and there was a correlation between the mortality rate. We found, I mean, here if you look at 3.5% in all the intensive care, these were various intensive care units where the studies were done. And you had, I mean, a 3.5 weekday mortality, which sort of, increased to 6.4. There could be a correlation, there couldn't be a correlation, there could be many reasons. But somehow this was very significant, and we thought, yes, we need to look at it in a different perspective altogether. Medication errors, again a big question mark. Can we do anything to decrease medication errors? How much of an effort do we need to put in to better our medication errors? This is something which sort of, is a continuous problem. I'm sure if I talk to many of you all here and ask you all to raise your hands, I mean, don't you have a medication error problem, or do you have a medication problem? And yes, all hands would go up saying that yes, we do have medication error problem. And if someone can sort of, give us a direct solution to it, we would all go for it. We tried to sort of, pick up preventable adverse drug events and non-preventable. Amongst preventable, we found a large amount of errors can be prevented. Again, this is a very widely sort of, acknowledged activity, and we know, yes, ordering can, meaning around 56% of the adverse drug events related to prescribing can come down. Administration of drugs, which is basically a nursing arena, can come down by 34%, transcribing errors 6%, and spending around 4%. This was a study based on around 29.7 per 100-day admission here. And we were able to pick up, 2 areas which we thought could help us in the long run. And the most common and the most long-awaited in most of our hospitals is computerized physician entry. Can we have it? Yes, we can have it, and we would want to have it. And let's hope that over a period of time, something like this can go a long way, and we get a CPOE in most of the hospitals. This is something which has been tried. It's quite successful. I think Apollo Group is the first hospital who's tried in one of the international institutes, and it has been quite helpful, and we hope we have it, more often in many other hospitals too. And another topic which we sort of, thought which can bring down medication errors and in general could be a clinical decision support system. What is it? We talk about it. This is something, I mean, the CPOE, everyone knows about it. We're just waiting for it to start, and we hope a day comes when we can sort of, ask all the audience, do you have it? And everyone says, yes, we have it. This is a forum which we had a few areas which sort of, came together and said that, yes, this can help us. What were the areas which we focused? We said basic clinical decision support system may include suggestion or default values for drug doses, routes, and frequencies. I think it would go and help us a long way. More sophisticated system can perform drug allergy checks, laboratory value checks, drug-drug interactions checks, and in addition to providing reminders about colorectal orders and drug guidelines. Incorporate patient-specific or pathogen-specific information. Besides that, when we speak about evidence-based practice, how does that help us where patient safety is concerned? Evidence-based practice is something which we have been, speaking heavily where nursing practices in general are concerned. And we've already got studies and evidences to say, yes, a good evidence-based practice nursing module is helpful to all nurses. Can we use that in patient safety? Yes, we can. We already have strong supporting evidences saying that. Could we pick up evidence and say, this applies to me? And the reason why I want to sort of, speak on that issue here is evidence-based practice is something which can be different from hospital to hospital. It can even be different from unit to unit in a single hospital. It wants the nurses to pick up maximum evidences which are applicable to her practicing ability and say that this works for us or this works for my intensive care unit, and we would want to do that. A few practices which we have sort of, brought together, and I thought I could share this with the audience over here, are as follows. Appropriate use of prophylaxis to prevent thromboembolism in patients at risk can go a long way. Use of perioperative beta blockers in appropriate patients to prevent perioperative mortality, yes, that can also be helpful. Use of sterile barriers while placing central venous catheters to prevent infection is already proved positively helpful and quite safe. Appropriate use of antibiotic prophylaxis in surgical patients to prevent post-operative infection is something which our microbiologist has been fighting very hard for, because somewhere down the line, antibiotic prophylaxis in the intensive care unit or for the hospital goes a long way. It's just difficult to convince and get everyone to agree to it. At least that's what happens, in our institutes. It's not very easy to put it to practice. It's easy for us to make a statement here. Asking patients to recall and restate what they have been told during informed consent process can go a long way, because this is something which we have to do. At times we miss doing it, but yes, that's something which we have to do. Continuous aspiration of subclottic secretions to prevent VAP has helped already. Use of pressure relieving materials or devices again go a long way. Use of real-time ultrasound guidance during central line insertion to prevent complications has already proved helpful. We are also trying it for peripheral lines, to initiate peripheral lines. And I think that too can go and help us a long way. Patient self-management, warfarin to achieve appropriate outcome anticoagulation and prevent complications, appropriate provisions of nutrition with a particular emphasis on early enteral nutrition in critically ill and surgical patients, and use of antibiotic impregnated central venous catheters to prevent catheter-related infection. These were few suggestions we thought could go a long way to bring down or help us better our ability in the critical care units. A few other studies which we thought we would sort of, have definite implications where ICUs are concerned or ICU nursing is concerned are as like, meaning that's what I would like to depict in the next few slides. And the most common problem which we face is self-extubation. Can we accept self-extubation? Can we accept accidental extubation of a patient who is intubated? That's one question which we have to ask ourselves. Does it happen? It happens. Should we accept it? Yes or no? And if we say that no, I don't want to accept it, what could be a measure to tell us that this is what I can do to sort of, look after it and say no? Can we come to a conclusion and say accidental extubations should not happen? Can we have a benchmark which says that my intensive care unit should have 0 extubation? Prevention is possible, and if we say prevention is possible, then we can have a 0 benchmark over here. We've picked up a few statistics of how relevant is talking on this issue. When we spoke about, this in a typical intensive care unit, where we found that a large number of patients were intubated. And if you have a graph which shows that a large number of patients are intubated, then extubation or accidental extubation, prevention of it has to be strategized. We picked up a few, intervention guidelines, and this is how it looked. What happened, before interventions and what happened after interventions is what I would like to discuss. Before I tell a nurse you have to prevent extubation, she needs to agree with me and say that extubation accidentally shouldn't occur. And when we say extubation shouldn't accidentally occur, she's going to ask me why. And this is something which she herself or the nurse herself sort of, can agree to. She can definitely say that yes, this can it has a very high risk of airway injury, it has a very risk of VAP increasing the rates subsequently, it can have an increase in ventilatory days, it increases intensive care unit stays, it also increases treatment cost for the patient as well as for the hospital, and ICU mortality increases because all these sort of come together and point a finger at that. So let's see what we can do to bring this to a 0 incidence. How can we reduce it? We can reduce it by using various strategies. A few of those strategies which are sort of related over here are better ET tube strapping techniques, better patient restraints, and a little bit of a staff education to emphasize it. And this also has a role to play where sedation in these patients are concerned. Somewhere where sedation is concerned, it has a direct relation. But what is extremely difficult is when can I say I have adequate sedation or my patient is adequately sedated. Most of the time it is like, my patient could be sedated, under-sedated or over-sedated. What's the right sedation? We just quickly go through it. basically when we spoke about, daily interruption of sedative patients, we were able to control the sedation in a patient, and when we basically wanted to control the sedation to decrease the extubation ability of a patient or an accidental extubation, we found it also helped various other things. And two other things which I can sort of, say it helped was, it decreased our ventilator days, it also decreased our ICU days. It also had a direct relation of VAP, meaning how VAP was associated with it, that's a different story. But then we were able to pick up data which said that there were related, these were the related incidences, and we can see the graph basically sort of, decreased in these two groups. Basically again, sort of, say that when we had so many positive reactions, when can we say that yes, this sort of can be a relevant data and tell us that this is the right sedation for my patient? That becomes a very, very high profile discussion. We have, a few areas where we can say that when we come together as a nurse and an intensivist, we can come to a conclusion